Hello, we're continuing our study in the book of Luke. As I'm teaching this, it's late on a Friday afternoon, heading into Labor Day weekend. And I wanted to be able to record this so that you would have it on Monday for Labor Day weekend as we spend 10 minutes in the Word learning timeless truths. Today we come to a great story in the book of Luke chapter 2. It's going to take a little bit to read it, but let me read it to you. It's Luke chapter 2. We begin in verse number 5, and we go down to verse number 25. I'm going to read today out of the New Living Translation. And so let's read together. Verse 5. When Herod was king of Judea, there was a Jewish priest named Zechariah. He was a member of the priestly order of Abijah, and his wife Elizabeth was also from the priestly line of Aaron. Zechariah and Elizabeth were righteous in God's eyes, careful to obey all of the Lord's commandments and regulations. They had no children because Elizabeth was unable to conceive, and they were both very old. One day Zechariah was serving God in the temple, for his order was on duty that week. As was his custom of the priest, he was chosen by lot to enter the sanctuary of the Lord and burn incense. While the incense was being burned, a great crowd stood outside praying. While Zechariah was in the sanctuary, an angel of the Lord appeared to him, standing to the right of the incense altar. Zechariah was shaken and overwhelmed with fear when he saw him. But the angel said, "Don't be afraid, Zechariah. God has heard your prayer. Your wife Elizabeth will give you a son, and you are to name him John. You will have great joy and gladness, and many will rejoice at his birth, for he will be great in the eyes of the Lord. He must never touch wine or other alcoholic drinks. He will be filled with the Holy Spirit even before his birth, and he will turn many Israelites to the Lord their God. He will be a man with the spirit and power of Elijah. He will prepare the people for the coming of the Lord. He will turn the hearts of the fathers to their children, and he will cause those who are rebellious to accept the wisdom of the godly." Zechariah said to the angel, "How can I be sure this will happen? I'm an old man, and my wife is also well along in years." Then the angel said, "I'm Gabriel. I stand in the very presence of God. It was he who sent me to bring you this good news. But now, since you didn't believe what I said, you will be silent and unable to speak until the child is born. For my words will certainly be fulfilled at the proper time." Meanwhile, the people were waiting for Zechariah to come out of the sanctuary, wondering why he was taking so long. When he finally did come out, he couldn't speak to them. Then they realized from his gestures and his silence that he must have seen a vision in the sanctuary. When Zechariah's week of service in the temple was over, he returned home. Soon afterwards, his wife Elizabeth became pregnant and went into seclusion for 5 months. "How great the Lord is," she exclaimed. "He has taken away my disgrace of having no children." This is one of my favorite stories to read in the Bible, and we're going to spend a couple of 10-minute sessions on this. I'm not going to read it each time because it just takes too long to read 20 verses. So as you turn on the next set of videos, you may want to reread the verses just to refresh your mind. I read a story many years ago in a little devotional called Our Daily Bread about a missionary in Africa who was telling the following story. She said that there was a mother at the mission statement who had died after giving birth to a premature baby. She said they tried to help the baby by improvising and coming up with an incubator to help keep the baby alive. But they only had one hot water bottle and it was beyond repair. So the missionary asked the little children to pray for the baby and for her sister. One of the little girls in the mission home responded and prayed out loud. This was her prayer. Dear God, please send a hot water bottle today. Tomorrow will be too late because by then the baby will be dead. And dear Lord, send a doll too for the sister so she won't be so afraid and feel so lonely. Well, that afternoon a large package arrived from England. The children watched as they eagerly opened the package. Much to their surprise, under some clothing was a hot water bottle. Immediately, the little girl started digging through the box deeper and deeper, saying, if God sent a hot water bottle, I know He also sent a doll. And she was right. God had known in advance of this little girl's request. 5 months earlier, a ladies group in a church back in America had sent items to this home and included both of these specific items the little girl would pray about. I love children. They have such a way of believing and expecting. They can teach us a lot by faith. Unfortunately, though, not all of my prayers have been answered so dramatically, and I'm sure not all of yours have as well. But I'll tell you, God does answer prayer, and God does always send His very best. Someone said that God not only prompts us when to pray, but He prompts us as to how to pray, and He provides the answers for us. So my question as we begin the study of this passage is, just how does God answer prayer? Have you ever prayed for anything and then not seen an answer? Have you ever asked God for something and not gotten it? In the next couple of lessons, we're going to talk about how God answers prayers. So I hope you'll tune in and watch several of these video lessons with us. But I want to begin by just giving you some background on the story so we can know the Bible a little bit better. Here we have a story that was written in Greek, but it has phraseology and literary structure like it was written in Hebrew. It's very different than the first 4 verses of Luke that we've already studied. Those first 4 verses were written in what is called classical Greek. But these next 20 verses are different. They're common, everyday Hebrew. And that is because what we're reading is probably Elizabeth, the mother of this baby that is to be born. It's probably her first-hand account. You'll remember that Luke would have interviewed her and written down exactly what she said. This story in verse 5 through 25 is called the Annunciation of John the Baptist. Annunciation is just a fancy way of saying the birth announcement, that the great John the Baptist was going to be born. There are 3 annunciations given to us in the Bible. Luke gives 2 of them. One is to Zechariah that we've just read about. The other is to Mary, the mother of Jesus. And then Matthew, in his gospel, will tell of one that God later gives to Joseph, the stepfather of Jesus. For a long time, Zechariah and Elizabeth, and that's a whole lot to say, so I'm going to just call them Zeke and Liz. Zeke and Liz have been praying for a son to be born. You see, in that day, it was a stigma for a woman not to have a child. They had been praying for years that Liz would have a child, and they had pretty much given up hope. You see, Zeke was a preacher. He was called a priest, and he had married a woman that was a descendant of priests, so this was really a preacher's family. They lived very godly lives and were godly people. And it came time for Zeke to go to the temple, the one central place of worship and the place where they would make sacrifice to God. This was still a time when animal sacrifice was being made to God as described and prescribed in the Old Testament. And it was Zeke's turn to work in the temple. They didn't live in Jerusalem, but it was his time to come to Jerusalem and work there. That history tells us and the Bible tells us there were 24 different classes of priests or preachers. And they would work on a rotation basis at the temple. On this particular occasion, Zeke was the one who was to go in and burn incense in the holy place. This is a place in the back of the temple where nobody could go except as prescribed by God. This would then be the highest point of Zeke's life, because no priest could do this more than once. So without a doubt, this would be the greatest day in Zeke's life spiritually, the most memorable day in his life. So at daybreak, they would clean the altar and prepare it for a fire. Then a second priest would come in and actually take the slain animal and offer it as a sacrifice. He would take the candlesticks and the altar where they would put the incense on and burn it. And then the other priest would come in, and today it would be Zeke. He would come in and take the incense and burn it, so that smoke then would rise up like our prayers rise up to meet God. When the people would see the smoke going up, they would know their prayers are being offered to God. It's all symbolic. And then a fourth priest would come in and lay the actual meat on the altar of the sacrifice and then pour a drink offering over the top of it. Today it was Zeke's job to burn the incense. He would have a golden bowl full of incense. He would take the burning coals from the altar into a bowl, and he would go into the holy place, and with a large instrument he would strike it to call all the people to come to their place to pray. And then he would ascend up to the holy place, spreading the coals on a golden altar and then arranging the incense. At that point, he would be left alone in the holy place, and he would receive the signal the sacrifice had been made, and he would burn the incense so the smoke could rise up to God. But at that precise moment that he was to begin to burn the incense, an angel appeared to him and started talking. That had gotten my attention, and suddenly he was filled with fear. The angel's name is Gabriel, and he told him that he and his wife would have a child. Zeke knew that he was old, and then he does something I wouldn't do even if I was writing the Bible. He said, my wife's old. She can't have a baby. Not a smart man. But his doubts made him believe that they couldn't have a baby. And he asked for a sign. See, he was praying. Didn't believe his prayers would be answered. When God told him it was, he still didn't believe. So Gabriel said, because you didn't believe, I'm going to take your ability to speak away from you. And you're not going to be able to speak again until the baby is born. He stayed in there for such a long time that everybody began to wonder if maybe he had died, because you didn't linger in the holy place. Finally, he comes out, and with his hands he indicated to them that God had actually been speaking to him. So now Zeke and Elizabeth go into seclusion for 5 months, and she's conceiving the child. And the child that would be born would be John the Baptist, a person whom later Jesus would say, no man ever born is any greater than John the Baptist. Gabriel had said to him in the holy place, your prayers have answered. For the next several lessons, we're going to draw some lessons from this story on how God answers prayers. Tune in for our next study.